pod bay doors, please, Hal.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Columbia, this is Houston, ALS, over.
Houston, Columbia, on the high gain, over.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface. Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston? Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture. You're in our field of view now.
I'd like to evaluate the various paces that a person can traveling on the lunar surface. You do have to be. All right, you do have to be rather careful to keep track of where your center of mass is. Sometimes it takes about 2 or 3 paces to make sure that you've got your feet underneath you. And about 2 or 3 or maybe 4 easy paces can bring you to a fairly smooth stop. Like a football player, you just have to put out to the side and cut a little bit.
The pod bay doors are open. Welcome once again. I'm your host, Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com and also ArmchairOscars.com. And received across the country from me, not planting the flag. It's my co-host, the critic and historian and, dare I say, legend from TalkMovieMe.com, the one and only Mr. Doug Heller. How the heck are you today, sir?
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Houston, we have a problem. Dear Lord, please don't let me fuck this up.
That last one is my favorite. That last one is my favorite.
Those are quotes from all 3 of the pictures that we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. But before that, I want to tell you where you can find all of us, because I'm pretty sure some people don't make it to the end of the episode. So, you can find all of our episodes at thepodbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can find us on Twitter at pod_bay. You can find us, give us a tip in our virtual tip jar at Patreon at pod_bay. And we are on iTunes and YouTube. So,
and with all of that,
thanks.
Yeah, join us wherever you can find us. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're talking. We're actually recording this
2 days.
A few days before the 50th anniversary of our moon landing, and we're gonna celebrate it by talking about 3 films that are not necessarily about the moon landing. Well, one of them is.
One is.
The
other 2 reference it specifically.
One is about the moon landing, one is about an attempt at a moon landing, and the other is the years long before the moon landing.
Right, the lead up.
The lead up.
The lead in, yeah.
We're talking about today The Right Stuff, Apollo 13, and First Man.
Yes.
And I've seen all of these things. I've seen all 3 of them. I love all 3 of these.
They're all really quite good. I have,
and all for different reasons.
Oh yeah. I saw The Right Stuff many years ago, and never since. So this was a second time revisit for me. I'm tempted to say that I haven't seen Apollo 13 since 1995 in the theater, but I'm not sure that that's 100% accurate. But I think it's pretty close. And First Man, this was also the second time I've seen this, and because I wasn't really paying attention to it. It was deep in screener season.
Mm-hmm.
I caught the highlights. I watched the whole movie, but I caught the highlights. This time, I paid a lot better attention to it, and really lament that it didn't get the recognition that it should have.
Yeah, the most successful out of these is Apollo 13.
Yeah.
What surprised me is now I saw The Right Stuff the day it premiered on HBO.
Oh,
And I was watching it with my dad.
you must have been about
Uh,
14 or 15 then, because it took
See, this was
3 or 4 years to get to HBO at that point.
no, it took about a year.
Yeah.
It took a year. Um,
Still, that's
Still, yeah.
13.
So 13, 14, something like that. I didn't know what it was about, and I was actually surprised that it wasn't about the moon landing.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't have a firm grasp on what I was looking at, but I'll tell you that later on, I got obsessed with that movie. I even read the book,
Oh.
which is as long as the movie.
The, the movie's 3 hours and 12 minutes long.
Because Tom Wolfe did not believe in keeping it short.
No, Tom Wolfe was not about brevity. Anybody who's even seen a paperback of Bonfire of the Vanities, I have a paperback of Bonfire of the Vanities.
I've read 3 of his books. I've read. I guess we're getting into the right stuff. I read The Right Stuff. I've read A Man in Full, and I read Bonfire of the Vanities. They are fully packed. He's not. He would never have been good for a short story.
No.
But when you read his stuff, you do feel like you're getting a full experience. And this one, I remember the book was not even really about the space program.
Right.
It was about those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can say that, and this may seem a little obvious, but The Right Stuff is the movie that has stuck with me the longest and has stuck with me in the most personal way.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I've seen it so many times. I love all 3 of these films, but this one is special to me. I watched it again last night, not having seen it in years. And I'm surprised at its approach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised, and I'm really, really buffaloed by how coldly it was received by the public.
Peculiar.
It bombed at the box office.
Well, it's 3 hours and 12 minutes long. Long movies, unless they're like fantasy or something, usually don't make a lot.
Well,
of
I mean,
money.
this was late in 1983.
Yeah.
We're deep into Reagan land.
Right.
And we've just introduced the space shuttle.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole patriotism thing is happening. So it's really, the movie should have sold itself.
Right.
Based on the atmosphere based on the political atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
it's
wasn't this Kaufman's follow-up to Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
it might have been.
Because Body Snatchers was in '78, and
Yeah.
I'm sure this took a very long time to put together.
Yeah.
So you would think that he was kind of coming off some good steam, but it's still 5 years later.
But it's now I know the critics just gave it a nice warm hug. I mean, they loved it.
Oh yeah.
And but it is a great film. I just I'm the public reaction to it. I do not understand. You put something like that out today, and people would have flocked to it. I don't know what.
So, but First Man didn't do that well at the box office either. And
Well, the
really
controversy may have, that stupid controversy may have killed it too. Plus, it came out at a weird time.
We'll talk about that later in the episode.
Yeah.
I will very happily go on a diatribe about the problems that First Man faced for no reason.
Now, as far as The Right Stuff, I'm very, very interested because Philip Kaufman should have had a bigger career than he did.
Very, very much so.
I'm struggling to remember because he didn't direct that many films.
He really didn't.
I know he directed that movie with Jeffrey Rush about the Marquis de Sade, the Quills. I know he directed that.
Yeah,
and
that is a messed up movie.
He did the
I've
Unbearable
seen-
Lightness of Being,
The
Henry
Unbearable
June,
Lightness of Being is amazing.
Rising Sun, which isn't.
Go ahead.
I have every reason to believe that Rising Sun was probably a much longer and more focused movie, in his mind than
Mhm.
what he was allowed to do with it.
Probably.
But the funny thing about The Right Stuff, the approach to this movie is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
The word that I came away with when I saw it again last night, the word that I came away with was cartoonish. It does. It seems, I don't, the approach to this does not seem like somebody's trying to make a biography. It doesn't seem like they're trying to make a historical drama. It
No.
almost feels like a satire. But
Kinda. Yeah. Especially when they get into a lot of the tests that they were putting the people through. You know, like the psychological tests and the the enema bag and
yeah, that whole thing with the enema bag is painful.
it is. It
'Cause
is.
what is it? They're trying to get them
They're trying to get from one end to the other end and up 2 floors to get to the bathroom.
being taken up by a man that Alan Shepard has offended,
Deeply.
deeply offended. Um, and he's walking very slowly up the stairs, and they've got this hose where the sun don't shine.
Yeah, yeah, and they've got to hold that in
Yeah.
until they get to the bathroom, and I
This
love
is how many people have made it.
I love that Shep was like, "Do you have any explosions?" He goes, "Yeah, we've had a few." Like,
I love that's our jumping off point, by the way. Well, one thing I love about this movie is that all
what's
of
a
the
pod bay doors without talking about enema bags?
right. You know, any chance to talk about bodily fluids, we're on top of it.
Actually, weirdly, that's true.
That's, if I think back on our episodes, yeah.
Yeah, that's
But-
regrettably true.
The strange thing about this movie is all of the astronauts are seen as regular guys.
Yes.
Just, you know, regular guys who do an impossible job.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone around them who has any other vested interest other than just,
Flying.
yeah, are seen as cartoonish.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's like, you know, from the scientists and those German scientists to the people doing the press, everybody is just, they're all seen as
Our
these...
Germans are better than their Germans. And did you notice, I loved it how Gus Grissom went from, or not Gus, Deke, went
yeah.
from being in the program and being a regular guy. By the end of the movie, he's the head of the program
Mhm.
and a cartoon. Like, he
Right.
changes remarkably. Like, he's basically just weeded out of the whole thing, even though he was one of the original Mercury astronauts. Once he becomes the head of the program, nobody likes him anymore.
The population of characters in this movie, I'm guessing when you direct a movie like this, you're less of a director and more of a traffic cop because there's so much to get done.
There's so much going on. Yeah.
But everybody under the sun is in this movie.
There are people that you wouldn't even expect. Harry Shearer and Jeff
Jeff
Goldblum
Goldblum.
are wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Stuart
mean,
Wilson's in this.
yeah.
God, who else is in this movie? It's just Eric Severide is in this, playing himself, and it's just so funny because every time you turn around, there's somebody. It's like, hey, I know who that is. But the funny thing is, when but there are these small side characters that just give this thing such a flavor.
Mhm.
And one of the characters that I was fascinated by is this shadowy presence played by Royall Diana, who is always on the sidelines when they're doing these when they're doing the test flights,
Mhm.
and he is the minister who presides over the
Right.
and he's just got a regular gig hanging around this little gut bucket
Well,
bar,
hey.
waiting for one of them to die, like the
Yeah.
Grim Reaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even know if he says anything, but
I don't remember. Uh, his part is later played by Rance Howard
yeah,
in
yeah,
Apollo 13.
just this this old minister with this
Standing there.
hangdog
Yeah.
face,
Yeah.
and he's just literally hanging around, just waiting for one of them to die. Because what was it, 36 pilots in 52 weeks or something like that?
Yeah, it was that was at Andrews, right?
Yeah,
Andrews Air
yeah,
Force Base. That was an insane number.
yeah.
Like, I mean, I can't even fathom that many people dying in 1 year.
I can't fathom anybody wanting to get on those tests, knowing those statistics.
See, that's the test pilot. I can't. I am personally not able to wrap my head around that kind of thrill seeking. I love roller coasters,
I
but
think
they're
today they would call it.
safe.
I think today they would call it extreme
Yeah.
sports.
Oh yeah.
Extreme, yeah,
Adrenaline junkies.
adrenaline junkies, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and because you get people like Chuck Yeager,
Yeah.
who every time somebody
Oh,
beat his record, he went back out and beat theirs.
Chuck Yeager is probably the most fascinating character in this
He
thing
is played
because,
by an eminently fascinating man,
right, played by Sam
Sam
Shepard.
Shepard.
Um, the funny thing is, the way they portray Chuck Yeager is he's this lone presence that stands off away from the other
Hmm.
guys.
Hmm.
He can do anything. You feel like he's almost. They make him almost mythological.
Right, and even when the space program happens and he's not in it, he on purpose does not go into the program. He probably
He's
could have
still
gone
out there
in.
doing test pilot stuff.
Right. And he's just doing what he knows and loves, but they keep going back to him off to the side, kind of like the father of the space program, because if he hadn't broken Mach 1, they wouldn't be doing any of that.
Right.
So he's kind of like he's the grandfather that gets to sit in the bleachers and and watch everybody
And
else.
of all the actors, all the brilliant actors in this movie, Sam Shepard is the only one who got an Oscar nomination.
See, I can't.
I can't fathom that.
I,
This is one of those movies, by the way, like Blackboard Jungle or like The Big Chill or something like that, where it's just loaded with people who would be big stars in later years.
right. Because I mean, it's got what Ed Harris and Dennis
Hmm.
Quaid and Sam
Lance
Shepard.
Henriksen is in it.
Yep, briefly and without a lot of lines, but
Yeah, plays Wally Schirra.
right. Because this is what 3 years before Aliens.
Yeah,
So before
yeah.
he got his really
Veronica Cartwright is in it.
Barbara
Um,
Hershey.
Kathy Baker.
Hmm.
I mean, they're all. It's fascinating. You're watching the actors you'll be watching for the rest of the decade.
Right.
And it's interesting how they're introduced because um, there's not a lot of introduction,
No.
but you know who you're dealing with when they come on the screen.
Hmm.
Because I love Dennis Quaid. He just
Gordo.
comes out to he comes as Gordo Cooper
He's
comes
such
out
a
to this.
dick.
He comes out to this little gut bucket bar, and he's just this little fish out of water. He does not know what he does not know what he's a great pilot,
Mm-hmm.
but he really doesn't understand the environment that he's in.
No, and he's kind of a jerk.
Hmm.
Um,
A guy who I'm going to presume probably got by on his looks.
Mostly, probably, yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
And that
uh,
smile.
yeah. The smile that makes him look like the Joker.
Yeah.
Yes. Watching that, I'm like, ooh, that's a missed opportunity right there.
Oh, Dennis Quaid built his career on that smile.
I know, but he could have played the Joker,
Yeah.
and he never. He's
They have
too
to wear
old now,
makeup.
but yeah. So
But he comes out with his wife has a much better handle on what they're getting into than he does. You can tell by looking at her because she's like, you're full of it and you have no idea what you're doing.
right.
And they, but these guys have been doing these test runs for ages, because there's an opening scene where they talk about the sound barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Levon Helm, by the
Yes.
way, the regrettably late Levon Helm talks
Drummer for the
about
band.
this demon in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
and how when you get to a certain point, your plane stalls out and you will lose control. And you will go into a flat spin, you will crash, and you will die. And
Yeah.
that is what has been happening
Yeah.
to these 36 men in 52 weeks.
Which
And they keep putting their pictures on the wall.
right, and if you're new there, you don't know that they're dead. You think that they're great pilots,
And that lady
and that
says,
you're
how does my man get his picture on that wall? Kim Stanley's like, you have to die first.
yeah. What do you have to do to get on that wall? Die. Oh.
It's a memorial.
Whoops.
And then it's interesting, but it's juxtaposed against these two guys, played by Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum, who look like they're right out of college.
Yeah.
They're so young. They look like they're just out of college, and they're they're trying to because of the Cold War and because the Russians are speeding up their space program, America's trying to catch up. And so they want to put people into space. Their presentation on who they want to put into space is kind of great. They want to put stock car drivers because they've got their own helmets.
Right,
They want to put acrobats. They want people who are adept at the human cannonball.
Right.
I mean,
It's like they really have no idea who they're looking for. And then, isn't it? It's Ike that's like, I want pilots.
right. Because
Ike,
Ike is
otherwise
sitting.
known as the 34th President of the United States.
Yes. Dwight David
Dwight D.
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower.
Who's sitting in the back in the shadows behind LBJ,
hmm
and
Who was the Senate Majority Whip at the time?
right, and played by Donald Moffat.
Mhm.
But it's so comical because they keep coming back to this. By the
Yeah.
way, they keep coming back to this same room, and he wants pilots. The problem is that nobody really has any understanding about what they're doing,
Right.
because I think Yeager calls it spam in a can.
He's not too far off.
Because they're going to stuff you in this little thing. They're going to stuff you in this little capsule.
It's practically just a tin can.
Yeah.
As immortally referenced by David Bowie.
Right. They're going to literally stuff you in a tin can and shoot you into space.
Right. They stick thousands of pounds of dynamite to your ass and shoot
Right.
you off the planet.
Now here's an interesting progression. When Yeager breaks the sound barrier, there's a guy standing there who runs to the phone
Yeah.
to get the story out. And the military guy says, no, no, absolutely no press. And it's like, no press. This is a matter of national security. Well, as soon as they figure out that the only way to get the funding for this is to get publicity, the next thing you know, Henry Luce is making a deal to get the exclusive rights to the story for Life magazine. And it's like, so they try to build this press machine
Mm-hmm.
around these guys.
And it's funny that NASA really lost their edge in spinning the message as the
Yeah.
space program went on, because they had scientists talking to people, and that's really
geez.
not a good idea.
No, no. Particularly when a lot of their scientists had German accents.
Oh yeah, well
And this is
even the ones that didn't, they're like, well, why can you justify the cost for this? It's like, well, but it's science. And
Yeah.
the scientists did not understand why there was a problem with the funding.
that is why John Glenn is a masterstroke,
Yeah.
because John Glenn, played by Ed Harris, comes into this thing, and when he speaks to the press, it's like he's a master at this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
These aw shucks, down home American boy platitudes that tell the press, giving them what would now today be called sound bites.
Right. Right. Right.
He is a master of PR,
Mm-hmm.
and because the rest of them are not.
No. That served him later in life too.
Right, as a senator, yeah.
Right.
And but the thing is, they're all these pilots are all these sort of self-effacing. They've got these their manhood is just right under the skin.
Mm-hmm.
And these foul-mouthed, test pilots. And then John Glenn comes in practically wearing the American flag
Right.
when he's on camera.
It's like he would have a cape made out of the American flag. He's always standing with his arms on his hips,
Right.
looking off into the distance with the ever-present wind blowing his American cape.
Mm-hmm. But he knows how to reel it back in too, because when Yuri Gagarin becomes the first man into space, NASA's trying to save face, because and John Glenn just comes up and says, "Look, let's just admit it. The Russians beat the pants off us. That's all." And he says, that's it.
Yeah. There's not really a way around that.
And then the spokesman, is like, "Well, who's going to be the first? Why weren't we the first person in space?" And the PR guy's trying to save face. It's like, "Who's going to be the first free man into space? Huh? Yeah." It's like, you suck at this.
Yeah.
But the tests that they go through when they're selecting these Mercury pilots, we got to talk about this, because this is
insanity.
This is insanity.
They had no idea what to expect. They just invented crap that might happen to a person. That little keeping the ball.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
and that dead fish of that cold, really hot, that nurse with just no humor at all is just watching them, and just there's that wonderful test where there's
she hates Gordo.
She hates Gordo. But when they're sitting in that one test where they're trying to see what, it's a stress test. They're trying to see what they can take. So they close them up in this little cabin, and they keep doing these things, like the exhaust goes off, the lights start flickering, alarm bells go off, and Gordo is asleep.
Yeah.
And the guy next to him starts losing his mind.
Yeah.
And it turns out Gordo was faking it.
Yeah.
But it's almost it's insanity what they put these guys through.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, it was all to sit in a can and do nothing.
Well, I mean, they did a little bit. I mean, they were switching, and they did pilot after.
But I mean, this is what they were expected
right,
to do.
to get up in there. Yeah, no, they were just there for filler.
The scientists effectively just said, we've designed this machine. You just sit in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great moment because they're not taking full advantage of their skills as pilots.
Mm-mm.
And there's a great moment when they show them the capsule, which, oh my God, this thing is about as big as a porta potty. And
I think you're giving it a little bit too much room. But
if you could only sit down, if you had to duck down to get in it.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, this capsule, I would go insane as soon as you close the door.
The Mercury capsules were terrifying.
I'm claustrophobic as can be. I would go nuts in this thing.
I'm not, and I still would have a problem. I mean,
because
the Apollo ones were barely bigger.
The scene where they stuff Alan Shepard into this thing.
Oh, geez, yeah.
And you see the door, and you see just how closed in he is. I would go nuts. But they bring the capsule around, and he says this, and the scientist is like, "But this is the final. This is the capsule. This is the final design." And they're like, "Okay, where's the window?"
Yeah.
Like, no window. And they're like, and they want some control over over what they're expected to do.
Yeah.
And they start blackmailing them. What's the phrase? No bucks, no Buck Rogers.
Right.
I love the fact that the movie is willing to deal with this kind of detail.
It's willing to deal with that kind of detail, and it also, despite how dangerous all of this is, Kaufman manages to keep a lighter tone.
Lighter tone. A lot of this, like I said, is very cartoonish, and it varies widely, and it deals with the personalities as well. And he does keep that very light tone when it's necessary. The scene that I have a very hard time watching is when they send Gus Grissom up, and he comes back down, and something happens. And the way the scene is edited, we don't see exactly what's happening. Because they're more interested in getting the capsule out of the water than taking care of him.
Right.
And he panics. And the hatch blows.
Well, they said stand by to blow the hatch, and he's like, "Hey, are you ready for me to do this?"
Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And so he didn't know where they were in hooking up the capsule, if it was up high enough for him to do that without sinking it.
Right.
And yeah, he was freaking out. It was hot in there.
Because he starts pulling his helmet off.
Yeah.
And there's a communication gap. They're not communicating.
Right.
But the way they treat him
is appalling.
There's no parade. There's no nothing. It's just,
They don't even get to meet the president.
No. He gets to shake somebody's hand. They give him a little distinguished medal, and
they give him the same medal that they gave Glenn, but they don't make as big of a deal out of it.
Right. It feels every bit like he did something wrong, and they're punishing him for it. And the scene that comes after it is a scene that I have wavered back and forth, because when his wife starts complaining about this, I, for a long time, thought that her argument sounded very petty.
Yeah.
But in seeing it in recent years, I completely understand what she's talking about because
Well,
she
yeah, they're
says,
pushing him off to the side. They're not giving him the same.
and she wants something
Mm-hmm.
for all of the heartache and all of the worry and all of the time that he has spent away from her
Mm-hmm.
and the family.
The
She
fear and the
wants
stress and yeah.
she wants some kind of restitution for that.
Mm-hmm.
You get it. You understand
Oh yeah,
exactly what she's talking about.
absolutely.
I wanted to go to the White House and see Jackie, and they're punishing you for something that really isn't your fault.
Right.
And it's just it's sad. Now you were talking about the comic level. This is really what brings it down to a very human level.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because Grissom's pride is really on the line because it's really just it's wounded because of
Mm-hmm.
this.
And didn't he end up being the only Mercury astronaut to get into the Apollo program?
Yes, unfortunately,
And
and
that did not go
unfortunately,
well for him because they screwed up the hatch and
they died
there was
on
an
the launching
electrical,
pad.
right, there was an electrical failure.
Yeah,
It started a fire and it killed all three aboard.
Ed White and Roger Chaffee died on the launching pad in a fire,
Hmm. With Gus
and so
Grissom.
Gus Grissom never got the glory that he
No,
should have had,
no, he never did.
and that makes that scene all the more
Hmm.
sad. Um,
I couldn't help thinking that if they wanted to remake this movie,
mhm.
they could cast Frank Barenthal as Gus Grissom and look almost
Yeah,
identical to the
yes,
actor that they have.
yeah,
Like,
pretty much.
jeez.
But I'm always just I love this film. I love the fact that they all get a chance. Um,
Everybody has their moment.
I think because of the screw up with Grissom, I think that kind of informs what happens to John Glenn
Hmm.
because I can't remember what was it. His launching bag deployed.
Hmm.
He was supposed to go around 8 times. He only went around.
3.
He only went around 3 times. And what's interesting, and this is something that will kind of play into Apollo 13, they don't tell him what the problem is.
Right.
They just tell him what he needs to do.
Hmm.
And because they're trying to get him back safely because something has ruptured. All those little fireflies,
Hmm.
that's his bag burning up,
Right.
his landing bag.
Hmm.
And he comes back a hero. He gets the ticker tape parade.
Right.
He gets he gets all of that. And that leads into what I think is an absolutely beautiful scene. Which, by the way, the whole thing with John Glenn's flight, that is a
That is.
beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeously shot.
Yeah, yeah. And the next scene also when they go to this barbecue put on by LBJ.
Ooh, yeah.
And he brings out Sally Rand,
Hmm.
who must have been in her 50s by this point,
Yeah.
to do her famous fan dance. And they're sitting there and they're looking at each other. And it's like you realize the men sitting in this room looking at each other have done something that no other human beings
Right.
have done,
Right.
save for the cosmonauts.
Uh-huh.
And they're all just looking at each other with a sense of personal pride. No cameras, no microphones, no press, nothing. It's just them, and they're such a brotherhood.
Hmm.
I love that. Then we cut to Chuck Yeager, who's still out there doing. He's still trying to one up himself
Hmm.
to a test that almost got him killed.
Yeah.
And at the last minute, and by the way, I
should
love
have gotten him killed.
it. Should have gotten him killed.
He was so good that it didn't.
But I love that scene where you don't know what happened to him,
Mm-hmm.
and which is strange because it's kind of a white knuckle scene, but Chuck Yeager's in this movie.
Yeah.
The actual real Chuck Yeager's
Yeah, he is.
actually in
Yeah, yeah.
this.
See, that was the thing. I was going to bring this up. This is released in 1983,
Mhm.
which is only 25 years after the breaking of the sound barrier.
And he looks like he's in his 80s.
Right. Or no, 35 years. Sorry, that was
35 years, yeah.
That was in 47, not 57. 47. But even still, this is like when they made Civil War movies in the 30s. There were still the people who did all that are still around.
Yeah.
And some of these guys were not that old at the time
Right.
of this movie because they were so young when they went up.
Right.
And, you know, that's something that, you know, First Man can't have because practically everybody's dead by 2018, 17 when they're shooting.
Particularly Neil Armstrong.
Right. But Apollo 13 and the Right Stuff had the benefit of having the real people on set
Right.
as advisors. It's like, no, actually it felt more like this. It should look more like that. It's like, that's authenticity right there.
It is. It really is.
I think that's why I loved this movie. Why I loved this movie when I saw it. I actually think I saw this in school. I think they showed it to us in science class or history.
Didn't you find it interesting, though, that the movie, and of course the book ends this way too, the movie does not end by predicting what's about to happen with the space program.
Right. No.
The only future event that it tells you, because Lee Von Helm opens the movie and then he closes it with his narration. Oh, the only future event that he tells you is that Gus Grissom died in Apollo 1.
Right. They only get up to Apollo 1.
Right.
In the Right Stuff.
But it's mostly about Gordo Cooper.
Yeah, largely.
Went around the Earth how many times? Oh my God.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. And so it ends on a very, very high note.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost get chills when I see the end of this movie. I love the Right Stuff.
I love that they end it the way that they started it with Chuck Yeager.
Yeah.
In trying to break another record.
And that scene where he's coming out of the black smoke. You know, they're driving out to the site and they see on the horizon this billow of black, because we didn't see the crash.
Right.
And then we just see him marching like nothing has happened.
I love Sam Shepard. I don't think anybody else could have played that part as well.
The regrettably late Sam Shepard, who we just lost.
Past a year ago, maybe.
As a playwright, I will say of Sam Shepard, okay.
He was weird.
Yeah, it was weird.
I mean, there's no dancing around that.
There's no dancing around that, yeah. But, okay, I guess we should move on to our next film. What are we talking about next? We're talking about Apollo 13.
Which may be my favorite movie of the three, but I don't know, because I really genuinely love all three of these. First Man, I think is going to end up being something that I go back to.
The funny thing is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's hard to pick a favorite because all three of them have a different agenda.
Right, they're all very different, and you're not really seeing the same story over and over and over, because they are distinctively about very different things. Whereas the Right Stuff is the build up to the moon landing and the moon program.
This is about the aftermath.
This is about the end. Yeah, this is about. This is where I was telling you, we were talking about this last night while I was watching First Man and you were watching The Right Stuff. NASA got really bad at PR. Instead of saying, hey, we're going to the moon again, they should have said, hey, we're building a base to launch to go to Mars. that should have been their pivot instead of going up there and going back to the moon and getting more moon rocks and coming back down. Nobody cares about that because it happened once,
hmm
you know. But if they said,
But we did go to the moon several times.
yeah, we did.
Mhm.
But if they had repositioned that and said, hey, now that we've been there, we can start building. And even if they just said, we're looking to use the moon as a stepping stone, they would have kept their funding and they would have kept interest for probably at least another 10 years.
The thing I love about Apollo 13 is that they address that.
Yeah.
Apollo 13 is probably of these three the one story with the most meat on the bone
Mm-hmm.
because it's directly about one or two things, whereas First Man and Right Stuff are about a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because Ron Howard is one of those is a director that, when we said this when we talked about Solo, you can't pin down a Ron Howard movie and say this is
No.
his style.
No.
It's
No.
not like, when you watch a Wes Anderson movie, you're watching Wes Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
You watch, somebody else. You watch Jonathan Demme movie, you were looking at a Jonathan Demme movie.
You watch Wells, you watch Hitchcock.
Right.
Yeah.
Ron Howard does not have that.
No.
He directs in the moment. He directs what he directs.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no particular agenda that's consistent through all of his work.
Mm-mm.
This is, and I'm trying to think of his other films because he has a lot of them. I think this may be his best or just one of his best.
I think this is his best film. Cocoon is fine. Willow.
Coon is fine if you take out Steve Guttenberg.
Well, yeah. I should rewatch Willow because I saw that when I was very young on television, so I was bored to tears with it. But
Let me tell you something.
pretty
I've
sure
seen
it's-
Willow recently. You're fine. Move on, brother. Just
but
move on.
but like, A Beautiful Mind is good. It's probably a second best movie,
hmm
but it's really far behind. I think this one. I rewatching it, I sat there kind of in awe of the fact that Braveheart somehow beat this at the Oscars.
Which one?
Apollo 13.
Apollo 13, yeah.
For both Best Picture and Director, even though Ron Howard won the Directors Guild Award, which is like almost a surefire way to get the Oscar for both picture and director.
Ron Howard will direct like 5 movies and then hit a really good one.
Yeah.
And then he'll direct 5 movies and then he'll hit a good one.
Right.
Because he made A Beautiful Mind.
He did, but he also made the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, and Inferno.
Those
and
two spin-offs and or sequels, and he made. He's made some really dreadful ones.
What was the movie with Chris Hemsworth? He's made 2 movies with Chris Hemsworth that weren't very good. One of them was Rush, and the other was that movie about Herman Melville, In the Heart of the Sea.
Oh yeah, I forgot all about those two.
Yeah.
And I mean,
justifiably so.
His first picture, what was that? Night Shift. That was a lot of fun.
His first movie was Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto. Didn't he? He did Night Shift though.
He did Night Shift. I like Night Shift.
Night Shift is funny. It's, Michael Keaton, right?
Right, Michael Keaton, one of Michael Keaton's first movies.
Yeah.
But Apollo 13. There were a lot of cynics when this movie came out, saying it's too much of a flag-waving epic, it's this. I think it's a lot more than that.
It's much more than that.
I think it says a lot about our priorities.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that these guys are so excited about going to the moon, and the fact that there's such indifference when they finally get out there, when they finally get the chance to do this.
Until there's a problem.
until there's a problem.
Right.
And the networks don't even want to broadcast it.
Right, right. The stuff from the ship, they don't even put him on uh, television, which
Right.
like, I mean, and then all of a sudden there's a problem and the whole
Suddenly it's
world
news
is
again.
watching. Yeah, the whole
Mhm.
world is watching and it's kind of like we took our celebrity blueprint
Mhm.
of let's build them up and then tear them down
Yeah.
and applied it to science.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
we don't care about this person anymore. Oh, Britney Spears shaved her head and had a weirdo meltdown. Let's put her back in the news, even though
Right.
we've ignored her for 3 years because nobody cares about her music.
Right.
Like, okay, guys.
I think the meat of this, the brilliant meat of this, is the idea that there is a problem and what they do about it.
Hmm.
I love the fact that when they get up there and there is a problem, the guys on the ground are in their heads rebuilding that rocket
Hmm.
to try to figure out how to circumvent the problem.
Right.
And they're trying to figure out, because there's that wonderful scene where they're at the troll pad and they're like, or they're all kind of trying to work it out. They come in with all of this junk and they throw it on the table and he says,
Oh
"What's
yeah.
that?" He goes,
We have to build. We have to
"That's what
make.
they got to build."
We have to make this square filter fit into the circle filter hole that this was designed for, using only the parts that are on the table.
Right. He throws it on the. That's what they
Go.
got to build. That kind of ingenuity fascinates me. I love stuff like that.
I mean, and they
And
didn't have a choice because
they didn't have a choice.
It's. I think
I can't remember what the problem actually was. It was
it
something
was
about
it was a CO2 filter.
the CO2 filter.
Um,
Um,
because they were getting dangerously high levels of CO2 because the LEM was only designed for 2 people for a few hours, not 3 people for a day or two.
Mhm.
So the CO2 scrubbers were overloaded. So
Mhm.
they had to do something else to get the CO2 out of the cabin, or they would die.
Yeah.
Before they blew up or bounced off the atmosphere or overshot the planet and drifted aimlessly.
Strangely enough, this is the one that this is the performance that Tom Hanks did not get nominated for.
See, I don't
Largely because
understand.
he had won 2 Oscars the two
See,
previous years.
here's the thing. I am not a huge fan of the 2 that he has won for. I know you are. I am not. But I would
I
have
like one more than the other.
yeah. I would have happily I would love to have seen him win an unprecedented third best actor Oscar in a row. So he would have the most best actor Oscars and be the only one to get 3 in a row because he should have won for this.
If I would have changed any of the destinies of his Oscar nominations, I would have absolutely made sure he got a nomination for Captain Phillips,
Oh yeah.
because that was a remarkable performance.
I
He has
have
a
difficult.
meltdown scene in that movie that is just it's
Oh,
unlike
at the
anything.
end after all the stress is released. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
you've never seen this wonderful actor. You've never seen him do this before, and
Right.
it was chilling.
I weirdly had a problem with Captain Phillips.
I had a lot of problems with Captain Phillips.
I I had a problem with Tom Hanks and Captain Phillips because for me, I was still watching Tom Hanks act. I never
Oh
quite
yeah,
got past.
that's that thing that happens.
But that usually doesn't happen to me, and I felt weird about that.
Well, it's actors like Leonardo DiCaprio,
Hmm.
Brad Pitt, even Jim Carrey.
Hmm.
where you have a very, very difficult time separating the actor from the role.
Right.
It's
Cary Grant, too,
yeah,
to an extent.
it's hard for them to disappear because that's all you're looking at.
Right, exactly.
Especially when it comes to Tom Hanks, which is why I appreciate Forrest Gump, because that's not him. It's a performance in which he removes himself from the role.
Yes, I will grant that I should rewatch Forrest Gump, but I am not a fan.
I love that movie.
I know you do.
But
We're still on deck for having an argument about that and Shawshank. So
yeah. Although I have my issues with Shawshank.
I like Shawshank, I just don't love it the way that so many others do.
But I wouldn't say that his performance as Jim Lovell is one of his best, because it is a standard Tom Hanks role. There's nothing really special to the performance that stands out from his other work. But
his
I will
other
say
work is
this.
so good that he probably should have an Oscar for every movie.
Well, based on how much, I mean, he's basically the mayor of Hollywood, and I mean,
Great man.
so by this point, he probably should have as many as Meryl Streep. But the thing about this movie is that inside that capsule, he's the anchor.
Mhm.
Because whatever these other two guys do, Kevin Bacon and Bill Paxton, whatever they're
The
doing,
late Bill Paxton.
the late Bill Paxton, whatever they're doing, he's anchoring it down.
Mhm.
There's a point where they're almost going to have a fight, a zero-G fight, because tensions get so high, and it starts to get cold in there.
Right.
It starts to freeze, and I think he starts to get the flu.
Yeah, he starts to get sick, which is exactly why Gary Sinise didn't go up with them, and he didn't get sick.
Right. But he's the anchor. They're also he pulls them back to reality. There's a scene where they're going around the moon, and they're looking out at the surface of the moon. Forgive this, with stars in their eyes.
Mm.
And they're thinking, boy, I'd love to go down there and do some prospecting. And Tom Hanks says, gentlemen, let's keep our eye on the ball. He's the one to pull them back in. It's like, okay, let's...
Nobody wanted to get on the surface of that moon more than Jim Lovell. And
right.
He had to consciously rally people away from landing.
Yeah.
That had to be one of the hardest things.
Mm. And I don't think he ever went to the moon.
No, he didn't. That was his last trip.
Yeah. And he but he's the one to like I say, he's the anchor that gets them. And the anchor on the ground is Ed Harris.
Again.
I like
was
what
telling
you said
last
night.
I wish that
Yeah.
he had been in First Man, because then we could have an Ed Harris space trilogy, Ed Harris moon trilogy. But they didn't put him in.
And he got nominated for this.
Mm-hmm.
He has a line that I'm going to admit that I've stolen. Let's not make mistakes by guessing.
Mm-hmm.
I love that line.
Yeah.
I love that. I love him. He's the common sense
Mm-hmm.
on the ground, like Tom Hanks is the common sense up there. And it's just all of these things that go into let's focus on the problem. Let's not panic. Let's get ourselves organized, put our heads together, and figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've never lost a man in space before. And we're not going to lose. We're not going to lose these guys.
And actually, yeah, that's still true. I mean, all of the deaths in the space program usually happen before they get out of the atmosphere.
Right. But I found it interesting. Yeah, and that is interesting, and you realize it's because of this kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
it's because of this kind of it's because of guys like Ed Harris.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of guys, or the character. It's because of guys like the Tom Hanks character, who can pull everybody back together. Let's get the emotional stuff out of the way and just put our nose to the grindstone and
Right.
do this.
Right.
That's why our space program worked as well as it did.
Yeah.
And it also should be said before we move on to our next film. Uh, we have not been back to the moon since 1972.
Nope. We actually can't go back right at the
Yeah.
moment.
Mm.
None of our, like, the shuttle, none of what we have can actually propel us to the moon anymore. We can only
Right.
just get up to the International Space Station. That's about it.
We would have to rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And who has the money for that?
Well,
Of course, I know that a couple of years ago, there was a resurgence of interest in space in the 1990s.
mm-hmm.
With was it Pathfinder?
Yeah, and then of
was
course
going to Mars.
we've had the Mars rover.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we were talking about this last night too. It's interesting that they really now there's an interest in it because you can access a live feed 24/7 from another friggin' planet.
There's a channel dedicated to it.
Yeah, you could just go online and just watch this apparently weirdly quirky little robot.
You go to the Science Channel and you watch all of this stuff.
Yeah, you can see it in real time. Obviously from the delay, but
yeah,
in as close to real time as you can. You are watching a broadcast from another friggin' planet. It's like, how amazing is that?
I'm still amazed at what the Hubble Space Telescope brought back.
The Hubble, and then the Hubble 2, and
the
couple
Eagle
that we've
Nebula.
got up there now.
The Eagle Nebula. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Can you believe it? I mean, that stuff is incredible. We figured out, because of the Hubble's telescope, that Jupiter has 3 moons we didn't know about. Jupiter has 16, not 13.
And there's also, you know, all of the galaxies that we've been able to see.
Oh my God, you know?
Like, literally, like, we look out, and in our galaxy there are trillions of stars, and we managed to look past that and see other, like, 6 or 10 galaxies also with trillions of stars and trillions and quadrillions of planets.
Imagine what we'll know in 10 years. You know,
if we're
we
still
keep
here.
going, if we keep going at this pace.
If we're still here, yeah.
But imagine, you know, if we keep going at that pace, imagine what we'll know in 10 years that we don't know now.
Yeah. Again, if we still exist.
But
I think we're on our way to eradicating ourselves.
But
yeah.
The one thing that this space program has lost since the Apollo missions, or actually probably since the Challenger exploded, the one thing we've lost is the human touch. Because
I was 5 years old when that blew up.
Because going into space takes a massive toll on the individual, which is what our last film is about.
Yes.
We're talking about Damon Chazelle's First Man.
Yeah.
I didn't expect this.
Tragically overlooked.
I knew that someday somebody would make a movie about the landing on the moon. I didn't expect this.
No, because this is less about the space program and more about Neil Armstrong, the man.
Yeah, it's more about the individual.
Right, and how things that happened to him shaped his attitude and how he proceeded with the rest of his life after his what 3-year-old daughter died of a brain tumor.
Right.
Um, I mean
The
that.
thing is, it's the best asset that this movie has is that we don't know Neil Armstrong very well
Right.
because he was such a private man.
Mhm.
He was such a private individual, unlike Buzz Aldrin, who, and there's nothing wrong with this.
You know,
Buzz Aldrin will give interviews about this at the drop of a hat.
right. And regrettably, he's kind of an asshole.
I like Buzz Aldrin.
I think the
He's the grandfather with a lot of candy to hand out, but really
Right.
really never had a clue.
right. Well, I like how they depict him in First Man. Um,
Was it Corey Stoll?
yeah,
Yeah.
he's just an ass. Because I'm just saying what everybody's thinking, and then Armstrong goes, "Yeah, well, maybe you shouldn't."
Maybe you should. Corey Stoll could glide through his career just playing an asshole.
Yeah, he's very good at it. Ant-Man.
Ant-Man.
Yes.
But I mean, it is interesting. This movie is not at all what I expected
Mm-mm.
because it's just largely about what fueled him to want to do this,
Mm-hmm.
what fueled his ambitions. And if you believe the movie, to believe the movie is basically to believe that the reason that he did this was to have something to do
Yeah.
because he was going through the worst pain that a parent could possibly have,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly losing a child that young.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes into this program and played by the perfect actor for this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Ryan Gosling is not the most enthusiastic actor in the world.
He's not a particularly emotive person.
He's not a particularly emotive person, which makes him perfect for this and made him perfect for Blade Runner, where he
Right.
played a robot.
Right.
Spoiler alert. And but it's fascinating that a lot of this is done. A lot of his performance takes place without dialogue.
Mm-hmm. It's a very quiet movie.
It's a very quiet movie.
For all the rockets blasting off, it's a very quiet movie.
If The Right Stuff waved the flags and did all the patriotism and all of that stuff, this movie is the exact opposite.
Right, and like you were saying, what this tries to do is focus on how these events felt in the moment
Mm-hmm.
more than being the grandiose, history-making, legendary thing
Mhm.
that it became. This
Well,
is an
there's
attempt to reverse the old adage, when the legend becomes truth, print the legend, from Man Who
Or
Shot Liberty Valance.
the judgment of history depends on who writes it.
Right,
This is a refutation of that
right,
because it's saying the judgment of history sees this as a global event in human history, which it was.
and it should be considered that more
And it
than
should be
an
considered
American
that.
accomplishment. Yeah,
But you've also got to look at the other side of the coin, too, that there was an individual there. He was suffering. He was in pain. And he put all of his efforts into his work. And it shows you what that did to his family.
mm-hmm.
Because just as much as he is suffering, so too is his wife. Because she's left
Wonderfully
at home.
played by Claire Foy.
Oh yeah, beautiful performance. I thought
Mhm.
really underrated performance.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a moment in the movie, and it's so brilliant, and it says a lot about what they're going through. Because this is not a movie about going to the moon. This is a movie about dealing with grief.
Mm-hmm.
There is a scene where she's standing in her front room, and she's holding her son's hand, and he says, "Where's Daddy?" And she says, "He's gone to the moon." And her son says, "Oh, okay. Can I go play outside?"
Right. Yeah.
This family has moved beyond any real sense of this being a heroic, patriotic event, a
Oh
thing
yeah. No.
that
This is
happens.
this is the 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 safety of their father, husband, provider. You know, this isn't just, oh, we need to do this for the country. It's,
Yeah,
do you really want to do this? Because you could probably die.
yeah, yeah, pretty much.
You're probably
One
gonna die.
thing,
Let's skip this.
one thing that I think that I wish that it would have been the perfect button on this one would have been if it pointed out the reason the actual, and I saw a documentary that pointed this out, the actual reason that Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. He was the closest one to the door. That is the reason that Neil Armstrong, and the reason that it was Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong, because they were next on the rotation roster.
Hmm.
That's it.
Right.
And it's just it's fascinating, and it's
It was
but you get
all
down
chance.
the what?
It was all chance.
Yeah, it just happened that way. But you get down to this man who, like you say, doesn't say a lot. There's a scene where he goes into a meeting and he's sitting there talking to this guy, and he says, "I was sorry to hear about your daughter. You think that'll affect your? You think that will affect
Oh,
your
I was
performance?"
sorry to hear about your daughter. And he just stares at him like, is there a question?
Yeah,
Like, why are you bringing this up? Do you think it'll affect you? And he says, I think it's unreasonable to assume that it wouldn't affect me.
right.
That is a
That's
beautiful line.
yeah, kind of a brilliant yeah.
Yeah. And
And did you get this feeling too? He's so stoic,
mm-hmm.
and he's so quiet, and he's so unmoved. There's no joy in this.
No.
When he gets to the moon, and it's a job for him.
Mm-hmm.
It's a first step onto the moon for him, and it's a glorious moment for everybody else, but for him it really doesn't solve anything.
No. Well,
And it for him it's a job.
in a way it kind of does though, because he runs up to that crater
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
he drops his daughter's bracelet with her name on it.
Mm.
Now, so she's always on the moon.
Right.
And if you notice near the end of the movie, when he gets back, he's a different person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he was finally able to let go uh, of his daughter and not hold on to that misery anymore. He let it go on the moon.
I mean, I'm talking about the actual event
Well, he didn't
itself.
have it wasn't like this elation. Like, he was nervous about it, he was excited about it, but it was okay. We need to not die doing this.
Yeah.
You have to have that professional mindset, or
Hmm.
you're just gonna, well, let's get down there, and then you die.
Because there's that moment, and this happened when they realized that they were about to land on a field of boulders,
Hmm.
and he had to shift. He had to coast for a long time to get to the Sea of Tranquility.
Hmm.
Otherwise, they would have crashed.
Hmm.
And that's where his thinking had to be.
Hmm.
It wasn't in wow, we're on the moon. It's
No, it's
wow,
life or death. I don't want to die here.
I've got to not die here, and
Yeah.
I've got to make sure that we can actually get back to the
Mm-hmm.
to the ship. And
And then get back to Earth and not die in the process of that too.
were you surprised that when they got to the moon, it's almost silent?
I really liked that.
I did too. I did too. It's so matter of fact.
Yeah.
He says the line, which I can't remember because I think he actually says the wrong line. Because according to Neil Armstrong, what he said was, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mm.
But because of the static, what you heard was that's one small step for man.
Mm-hmm.
So it's they don't I don't remember if they observed that in the movie.
I don't believe so.
But it's a very I hate to call it cold. It's not a it's not a warm-hearted movie. It's not waving as many flags as
No, and
and
so here
this
we
is not
go.
waving one particular flag either.
So they don't show him planting the American flag.
Which Marco Rubio loved that. He went on a tirade about that.
Oh, and so well, it takes away from the accomplishment. It's saying it's not an American accomplishment. No, it's saying it's a global human accomplishment because, well, it is. And you
That's
can't.
not really what the movie was
The movie's not
about.
about that at all. And you do see the flag, although far away,
Yeah.
from a huge distance. But, um, and the funny thing is, and I love that Chazelle did this. They said Chazelle and Gosling said they shot him putting the flag in.
Mhm.
Chazelle decided to cut it.
I think it would have taken away from the moment.
Yeah, it would have because that's not
It's not un-American. It's just not what the movie's about.
right.
It's the movie is about him getting past this pain that he has and trying to put focus on something else, trying to put focus on this event. And then, as like you say, when he gets to the moon and he drops her little bracelet into the crater, there's that um, there's that moment that makes it personal to him.
Mm-hmm.
I think cutting to the flag would have it would have I don't know pulled away from the moment.
Right,
I'm not
because
saying that to be un-American. It's just
I mean, well, no, because I mean, he gets down, he says his thing, he
Mhm.
takes a couple of steps, and then he plants the flag, and then he's jumps over to the crater and all of that. They just skipped
Right.
that part because it's not. It was part of the job and not part of the emotion.
Yeah.
And I the criticism of it makes me think that the people who were upset about it didn't see the movie or
Mm.
didn't understand because it is such a quiet, contemplative movie that
Mm.
they wanted to go there for the same stuff that the right stuff had, like big flag waving, "Yay, America, we got to the moon!" And it's
America.
yeah, America, fuck yeah. Um, but they miss the point entirely that
Mhm.
it's about a man, and it's like that line in Star Trek First Contact. Don't try to be a great man, just be a man and let history make its judgments.
Right.
And that is a very poignant line that is applicable to the understanding of this movie.
Right.
Um,
But the movie does not pull away from the fact that this event does change him.
mhm.
This event does affect. I mean, who could not be affected by this?
Right?
But Spock, maybe. I mean, I don't
Mm.
know. It's just
Even
he
Spock
goes
would have.
he goes up and he does this, and he's able to let go of he's able to let go of a lot of that pain that he's having. That's really the focus of this movie. It's about getting past the grief on top of doing the most monumental thing
Right.
that anybody's ever done. And here's the funny thing. Neil Armstrong retired to private life after this.
Mm-hmm.
Neil Armstrong, if Buzz Aldrin had been closer to the door, could have built a personal, his own personal industry
Mm-hmm.
on his own shoulders.
Right.
He could have written 93 books,
Right.
run for office, been in movies, been on television,
could have been president.
could have been president. But it says something of him that he didn't do any of that,
Right.
that he didn't want it.
Mm-hmm.
That this movie points out, and the movie's also kind of guessing too, is that when he gets to that point, the movie points out that's not what it was really about.
Right.
Ultimately.
Right. It basically is saying, all of the things that you thought we were going to focus on, we're not focusing on that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's not about that at all. It's and I love how Giselle directed this. It's a very intimate portrait. We are often really, really close to Ryan Gosling's face.
Mm-hmm.
He makes this a personal testament. It is a personal movie about a person who did a great thing, but we have to be reminded that they're people.
Yeah.
They're not gods.
We also have to remember and one thing I want to make sure that I get in here about this movie, this is a white knuckle experience.
Oh yeah.
This is very much, when they're going to the moon, when they're getting off it, you feel that. And when they're the G-forces in this movie are incredible.
Yeah.
When they're trying to get, and even though how it's going to turn out,
Mm-hmm.
it's an amazing experience physically. Now there's all of the personal thing with Neil Armstrong, but it's trying to get you to feel like the spam in a can.
Right.
So that you feel what they felt.
Right. And you do, from the opening shot, being bounced around inside this jet.
Yeah.
With him, not really knowing what's going on. Like, I only figured it out before he got dropped. Because I had seen the right stuff 2 days before.
I also want to say about this movie, you and I belong to the Online Film Critics Society.
Yes.
We got a screener of this.
Yes.
When I got the screener for this movie, I had not heard of it.
Oh, really?
So when I sat down to watch this movie, I didn't even know it was about Neil Armstrong. I didn't know who was in it. I didn't know who directed it. So I came in as completely cold as I possibly could.
Yeah, you did.
So when I realized that this was going to be about the moon landing, I'm thinking this is going to be, is this going to be like a TV movie? Because there was a TV movie about this.
Oh, yeah.
Made in the late 90s. It was kind of terrible. But when I sat there and watched this, I was shocked at just how matter-of-fact it is. How stripped down it is of all the heroics and all the theatrics.
Right.
And it's kind of like an anti-war movie. You're trying to make a movie that is not that's giving you the experience of being there. And it's again, I can't say enough good things about it.
It's wonderful. It's underappreciated. It was overlooked.
Yeah.
So I know that we don't do this on every episode like we used to, but I have a couple of recommendations. They're both documentaries. One is For All Mankind, which is the actual for real landing and the footage and everything that was produced at the time.
Mhm.
And one that just came out this year, Apollo 11,
Yeah.
is still running in some science centers.
Is it
Um,
called? It's there's one that's out right now.
yeah, it's
It
Apollo
hasn't hit.
11.
Is it called Apollo? I thought it was called something else.
Oh, well, I know that there was a documentary that came out this year that recently has become available at home, but is still playing in some science centers called Apollo 11. And if
There's a
you're
movie
referring
called
to something,
Armstrong.
oh, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, that's a brand new movie. That's as of this recording is a brand new movie. It's a documentary,
Hmm.
which I haven't seen. But yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely check out those two documentaries. They're really kind of monumental. For All Mankind is one of the greats, just because it captures all of this.
I really like a documentary called Moonshot, the
Okay.
real stuff,
Hmm.
which was a fantastic document. That came around about the time that the Pathfinder was landing on Mars,
Hmm.
and it was basically trying to just strip it down of the patriotic parts of the moon landing and just tell you how we got there.
Mm-hmm.
Another movie that I really, and I know a lot of people have seen this, but I want to reiterate what a good movie it is. I really like The Martian.
So did I. That was so good.
I'm not generally very partial to Matt Damon.
I'm not generally partial to Ridley Scott, but
I'm not either.
that was one of his best movies.
And I'm not partial to Damien Chazelle, although I don't really have much to go on because he's only directed 3 films so far.
Right, and I like Whiplash. Whiplash is very good. I like to a point La La Land. I
I
can
like La La
admire
Land.
I can admire La La Land more than I like it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I didn't see Whiplash.
Oh, really?
Um, I've been on the wrong end of abusive teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need that movie in my life.
Right.
It's kind of like guys who go to combat and they're like, I don't need to see war movies.
Right. Yeah.
Damon Chazelle, I can't say much about him. I'll say that First Man is his best film, but I've only seen the only other one I've seen was La La Land, and I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
Um, I I really think he's like I say, I don't have a lot to go on.
He's got a lot of promise, I think.
He does. He does. He
Um,
just,
and he's the second youngest person to win Best Director, or the youngest
right.
person to win Best Director.
Yeah.
Um,
Should have been Barry Jenkins, but that's just
yeah.
me. I'm so glad Moonlight won the Oscar.
Me too.
But I'm just going to say about The Martian, it's very matter of fact. It's very heroic. It's very much like Apollo 13.
Yeah.
And just what a person. I love any movie that focuses on the day-to-day journey of what a person has to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the observation. It reminded me a lot of Castaway. And the day-to-day stuff of what a person has to do to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And the ingenuity that they have to put into it.
Right.
And
those are great to a point. Sometimes the mundaneness gets a little too overboard in some movies.
in The Martian, I don't think it does.
No, in The Martian, it's I I I think it owes a lot to the charisma of Matt Damon,
Yeah.
and I think it's funny that he was in 2 space movies that year.
Yeah.
He was in Interstellar too. Very different person in Interstellar.
Which a lot of people like more than I did.
I loved Interstellar.
I've seen Interstellar twice, and both times and I saw it twice. I've seen it in a theater twice,
Hmm.
and both times it left me cold.
I saw it at home once, and that's all I've seen it. Been meaning
I'm
to
sick and
rewatch
tired
it.
of the name Murph. I never want to hear the name Murph ever again in the rest of my life.
Murph.
Murph!
I loved Interstellar. I loved the concepts, the way that it played with time. The as far as we know, realistic interpretations of how black holes work and what happens to people and places and things as they get closer to a black hole, and the time manipulation and distortion. And I love how they made the wormhole a big giant sphere instead of just like a hole like they do most of the time, because it's a 3D representation of what, because it would be in 3D.
I just felt like you are on the other side of the freaking universe, and your only concern is what's going on at home. And I thought, okay, let's deal with what's there a little more. And all we can talk about in the most fantastic, amazing thing that has ever happened in human history. And they keep worrying about Matthew McConaughey's kids. And I was like, okay, let's deal with where we are first.
I saw that as more of a grounding it in the human.
Yeah, but they do that too often.
He is out there and doing this kind of selflessly, but at the expense of his family, and probably never seeing his children again, just so that they might be able to live.
And that's fine. I just felt that the movie leaned so heavy on that, and not the event that they were trying to deal with. Not enough on the event that they were trying to deal with. It just it wasn't counterbalanced for me enough.
It worked for me, but anyway,
didn't work for me.
That's what we have for you here. You can find all of our back episodes at the podbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can find us on iTunes and on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at pod_bay. And you can throw a tip into our virtual tip jar at Patreon, also at pod_bay. We thank you so much for listening, and the Pod Bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control 9, to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing 5, countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Check ignition 1, and may God's love be off with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping to tell.